Somos Berenice Flores y Sebastián Iguiluz y este es el podcast Entreprenup de Keep It Up Show, un espacio creado por dos emprendedores en el que buscamos traer gente chingona e increíble que está constantemente cambiando la forma de ver y hacer las cosas. Cada martes, jueves y sábados podrás escuchar un nuevo episodio donde encontrar información clave que te ayude a impulsar tus ideas, tu empresa, pero sobre todo, tus sueños. No importa qué te dediques, keep it up. Bienvenidos a un nuevo episodio de The Keep It Up Show. Antes de empezar, si nos estás escuchando por YouTube, ayúdanos con un like, dándole clic a la campanita y suscribiéndote al canal. Y en Spotify, dándonos seguir. Hoy tenemos de invitado a Fabian Nicieza, escritor profesional durante décadas de novelas, cómics y videojuegos y co-creador del famoso personaje Deadpool. Hablaremos con Fabian sobre cómo vivió el crecimiento de Marvel, desde la bancarrota hasta una de las franquicias más taquilleras, su experiencia con las dos caras de la moneda de las adaptaciones de Deadpool y el origen secreto de Ryan Reynolds como Deadpool.
Hola, muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos a otro episodio de The Keep It Up Show. Aquí Sebastián Iguiluz, cofundador y CEO de Entreprenup, y estoy con Fabian Nicieza, escritor de cómics y creador de varios personajes como Deadpool, X-Force, etc. Por el resto de la entrevista vamos a estar hablando en inglés, entonces perdonen mi inglés, pero bueno, los dejo para empezar a hablar en inglés y darle la bienvenida a Fabián. Hi Fabián, how are you?
Estoy muy bien, ¿cómo estás? Sí, ¿ves? Hablas español tan rápido que ni puedo entender. So English is safer for me.
Perfect.
But thank you for letting me hear my name be pronounced so smoothly and perfectly. It does not happen very often in my life.
I imagine. So for everyone that was like, okay, why does he speak Spanish and why is the episode in English? A little bit of context. Fabian was born in Argentina, but he moved to USA at 4 years old, I believe.
When I was 4 years old, yes.
So,
And haven't spoken Spanish on a daily basis since I was 18 years old.
okay.
And I'm a lot older than 18, so you start to lose some of the ability to speak fluidly. So it's easier for me to do an interview with long form answers in English than it is in Spanish.
We'll have to grab you to Mexico City to watch one of our events in order for you to practice your Spanish.
I was just at La Mole. The last convention I did before the whole shutdown was La Mole in Mexico City. Second time I've been there in 4 years. I love going, and I've been to Mexico City on business a few times because I did work with AAA Lucha Libre. We did work with them, so I was in Mexico City, 2-3 times in the span of a year a few years ago. I like going to the city a lot.
Perfect.
And after a few days, my Spanish gets a lot easier. It's a lot smoother because I'm talking and listening to it all day long.
Before we go to the important questions, I just have to ask, when you speak Spanish and you get fluent, do you still have an Argentinian accent or is
Creo
it
que
more
sí,
like...
me dicen que muchas veces cuando hablo español, alguien me dice, sos argentino. Y yo voy, no sé, porque no sé las diferencias. Solo sé que es difícil para mí entenderlo porque la gente que habla en español hablan muy rápido. Y yo no crecí hablando muy rápido. El castellano hablaban más despacio hace 50 años. Ahora en Argentina hablan mucho más rápido. Pero hace 50 años hablaban mucho más despacio. And that's how I learned, and that's how I heard it my whole life. So when you were doing the introduction before, I can't keep up. It's just too quick. The words, because you're fluent and whoever's listening to you is fluent, they understand how the words just sort of merge together to form sentences, but I can't separate the words in my head when I'm listening. It's too fast. So I lose parts of your sentences when you're speaking as quickly as you do. And, there's times where someone's speaking to me in Spanish and I'm just nodding my head, but I don't understand half of what they're saying. Even though I know all the words, I can't separate them and pick them out.
No worries. For the rest of the interview, we'll be speaking and asking in English, so don't worry about that.
Okay, pero yo voy a hablar español.
Perfect. So, sorry, I just have to mention it. For everyone that's listening to us, before we started recording, Fabian and I were talking about how he grew in a home where he helped his parents with his brother to learn English by talking to them in English, and then they will talk to them in Spanish so that they will learn. And funny enough, the roles change, and now I'm talking. The Mexican is talking to him in English.
Yo voy a hablar en español.
Yeah, and you're speaking.
No way.
It's really funny how the tables have turned. But okay, so basically, Fabian. Sorry, in English, it's Fabian or Fabian? How do they say?
Fabian in English.
Fabian, yeah.
So you can say Fabián, no problema.
Okay. So Fabian, I'm just going to say Fabian because I want to say it in English. But Fabian, for the ones that aren't so familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about what you do for a living and your career?
I have been a professional writer for over 30 years. I started working at Marvel Comics in 1985 on staff at the company. I was Marvel's advertising manager, responsible for all of the advertisements, promotional posters, promotional giveaways at conventions, all that kind of work was my responsibility. And then I started to sell my writing to the editors on the comics themselves, little by little, and I got to the point where the staff job, although I loved it, the staff job was taking up too much time for the amount I was earning from income from the writing. So it didn't make sense to try to keep doing both. I worked on staff at Marvel for almost 10 years, from an 85 to 95. But the last 2 years I was doing so much writing that I had to reduce the amount of days I was going into the office. So I've been a professional writer in comic books. I've done video game script writing. I've done animation, Bible writing, and I've just sold, and I've done intellectual property management for Hollywood studios and video game companies and toy companies, as well as comic book writing. And I sold my first novel last year, which we'll talk about later, but I will soon be officially a novel writer as well. So, you know, it's been a very varied, diverse career. I'm mostly known for my comic book work, but quite frankly, for the last 20 years, that's been less of my yearly income as far as work goes. Comics have been a third to a fourth of my yearly income, and other kinds of work have been the main things I focused on.
So Fabian, what's your secret origin? How did you decide that you wanted to be a writer about comics?
Well, it all comes back to being an immigrant, quite honestly. When we first came to this country, my brother's 3 years older than me, so I was 4, he was 7. When we first came to this country, one of the first things that we recognized was the Batman TV show in the 1960s, because, and the Superman reruns of the 1950s show, because in Argentina at the time, the Batman serial from the 1940s was running on Argentine television in black and white, and the Superman TV show was also running on Argentine television. And I was 4, so my memories are very dim, but I know that I would be watching it with my brother. So when we came to this country, he saw the comic books on the newsstand and asked my parents, can we get a Batman and a Superman comic? Plus they were on TV. And my parents said, okay. They weren't that expensive. Back then they were 12 cents. And my parents didn't have a lot of money when they came here. And my dad had just gotten a job when we first got here, but we started getting the comics because it helped us learn how to read and write English faster. And it really did. Neither one of us were held back any grades in school because we didn't know the language. We learned literally while we were in school. I don't remember much of my first grade year because that's when I was learning the language and transitioning in my head. But I do know that at one point, my brother tells the story that one of his classmates saw that he had a comic book and said, oh, you don't want to be reading those. You want to be reading these cool ones. And the cool ones were Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and Marvel stuff. So my brother desperately wanted to make sure that he fit in, and wouldn't get beat up for reading Batman and Superman. My brother got Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, and I'd be reading whatever he got. And little by little, I just kept getting my own stuff too. We could only buy a couple a month, like 2 or 3 a month, so that's all we would get. And we just read them a million times, and we drew too, so we draw from them, trace over them, all the things little kids do with their comic books back then that they don't do anymore now because they're putting them in plastic. But that's what we did, and it helped us learn how to read and write English. So by the time I was 10 years old, I already knew that I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to write. I thought maybe I wanted to draw too, but I soon realized that I wasn't ever going to be a good enough artist to draw professionally. I was a good enough artist that I could tell my own stories, but ultimately, the more I did that through my teenage years, I realized that the writing is what I really loved. The writing of the story, the dialogue, the creation of the plot, much more so than the art. The art's a lot more work, so I didn't want to do that much work. And I went to in high school, I had a revelation, and it's an odd one because I realize a lot of people don't have the same revelation I had. I realized that the faces of the photographs of the authors on the back of every book that I read, because I read like crazy, they were all old people. They looked like they were 35 or 40. They were old, right? So I thought to myself, oh, you're not going to be a writer when you're young. You're not going to get out of school and say, I want to be a writer. There's no help wanted ads in the newspaper in the classified section saying novelist wanted and apply here to be a novelist. That's not how it works. So I realized I needed to get a job that would get me close to the opportunity to become a writer, to get a chance to be a professional writer. So I went to college for communications, which was public relations and advertising. And my first job, I couldn't get a job in advertising because I didn't type fast enough out of college. So I got a job at a book publisher, Putnam Berkeley Publishing. Putnam was the hardcover house and Berkeley was the paperback house. I got a job at Berkeley Publishing, and that got me close to book publishing. And the jobs pay really badly, especially back in the 80s, but entry-level publishing jobs don't pay very well at all. So you got to really kind of leave companies and come back and move around a lot in order to try to increase your title and your salary. And I enjoyed it a lot. It was a good job. It was a good company. It was good people to work for. I probably would have stayed there longer. I was there for 2 years. The reason I left is that I found out that there was friend of a friend had a sister who worked at Marvel and was looking to hire an assistant. And I thought, you know what? I want to get a job at Marvel. I tried to get a job at Marvel in DC right out of college. I interviewed actually quite a bit at both places. I had 3 rounds of interviews at both places. I didn't get either job, which I shouldn't have gotten because I didn't have the experience that I needed, but at least I had done a good enough job in the interview process that I went through 3 rounds. So I interviewed with her and she hired me, and I left Berkeley right as I was ready to start trying to submit some sample prose work for some of their monthly serialized books. They did a series of a spy series and 2 Western series, and they used multiple authors on that. So that was my goal. My goal was I got my foot in the door. Now I'll get my foot in the door of editorial by showing them that I can come up with an idea, that I can write the manuscript to the length they need, that it's going to be right for the tone and flow of what these books are. They were kind of crappy, cheesy books, and they paid really little, but it was a great way to show editors what you can do, become reliable to them, and then try to sell your own book. And that would have been my plan. That was my game plan once I was at Berkeley Publishing. Getting the job offer at Marvel changed that. So once I got a job at Marvel, it became the same exact thing. Get my foot in the door, take my time, get to know people, and then try to sell my writing freelance. So you have your 9-to-5 job when you're at a company like that, and the freelance writing is all done after hours, on weekends, things like that. So I could sell a story to an editor at Marvel, but I wasn't writing it during the day. I was doing that, on the way home, on the bus or train, because I had like almost a 3-hour daily commute, total. or I'd be writing it at night and on weekends. And I didn't sell my first story to Marvel till I was almost 2 years in. I didn't try that much. I only tried a little bit, and then I got a break because Marvel was publishing these New Universe books, which in order to celebrate Marvel's 25th anniversary, for some odd reason, they thought creating a whole new universe of titles was the way to celebrate Marvel's 25-year history. And the books weren't doing that well right out of the gate. And the schedule was a disaster. So a lot of the regular teams were not able to keep up with the schedule. And that's when editors are desperate and they're willing to hire a first-time writer to write what's called an inventory story. And back then, every editor had to have an inventory story. That meant a completed book, the pencils, inks, letters, colors, all done, sitting in a drawer until the schedule falls apart. And when the schedule falls apart, an editor is able then to just take the inventory story out of the drawer, deliver it to production, and they don't miss shipping. They don't miss their newsstand rack. It wasn't as much about the direct market back then, although our sales were stronger in the direct market. But if you missed your newsstand slot by not shipping on time, you didn't get that slot back. So the company would be in the hole for 200,000 copies printed of a book, So we had to make our schedules back then in a way that the companies don't have to nowadays, because it's all for the direct market. And I sold an inventory story to Cyforce, which was a New Universe title, and the editor really liked it and asked me to do another one. So I did issue 9, and then I did issue 13, and then Jim Shooter said he's going to be the new writer of Cyforce. So within 6 months, I had a monthly book, which was a little scary and not normal. I don't. Some of that is that I impressed them. I'll admit to that, but some of it was sheer luck and the madness that was going on around those titles at that time. There was a real sense of desperation and uncertainty and all this other stuff going on. So I got that monthly book, and I just kept writing for them freelance while I had my staff job. My staff job took 9/10 of my time and focus, but the writing just kept increasing. Especially by the early 90s, the writing really just kept increasing a lot. So I ended up doing exactly what I wanted to do, where I wanted to do it, and how I wanted to do it, which is very rare and very fortunate. But even to the point where I went to college for public relations and advertising, and I got to become Marvel's advertising manager. So I got to be doing, by the time I was 30, I was doing everything I'd ever wanted to do since I was 10, 11 years old. And that creates a whole nother sort of conundrum, not dilemma, not problem, but conundrum, because if you've accomplished much of what you hoped to accomplish by the time you're 30, what the hell are you going to do next? So much of my life, much of my career has been trying to find the next thing that excites me or interests me, and if it generates the same kind of revenue that I was able to generate back in the early 90s, that's a bonus, but it's not expected because very few people actually earn a good living being a writer, and I've been very lucky in that regard, that I've been able to earn a good living my entire career as a writer. Some years are better than other years, but I've been able to I've been able to pay the mortgage and put my kids through college as a writer, which doesn't happen that often on this planet, so I'm pretty fortunate in that regard.
Congratulations. And as you said, maybe there's a little bit of luck factor, but in the end, Fabian, you did a lot of hustle, a lot of work, and a lot of smart choices that put you in the position, because if you hadn't done any of that, someone else will have gotten the lucky break, and maybe they will have made the career you had, or maybe they will have a better career or a worse career.
Yeah, and you acknowledge that. I'm very critical of my own writing, but I'm not critical of my work ethic. I'm not critical of my ability to socially engage and interact with people, which makes them more likely to want to hire me because nobody It's a lesson that a lot of freelancers, a lot of creative people in the industry don't understand. Nobody wants to work with an asshole. That's all there is to it. Nobody wants to work with an asshole. So if you are an asshole, that's already limiting your opportunities to get hired, because nobody wants to work with you if you're that way. So I can be challenging to work with. I could be difficult to work with, but ultimately it's always not for my ego. It's always for the betterment of the book. It's always for the betterment of the story, or the right character moment. And that's what I'll argue about and fight for. It's almost never been about my own status or my own opportunities or anything like that. And that comes also from a background playing team sports and coaching team sports. A lot of people in our industry don't have that kind of background, so they literally don't know how to cooperate in a team effort because they've never been a part of a team. It's a strong percentage of our industry that hasn't had that as part of their background. And I realized within a month of working at Marvel that was such a truth. It was such a reality. And the arrogant young me said, oh, I'm just going to walk all over these people because they're clueless, right? And the older me looks back on it and has quite a bit more sympathy for the people who were my coworkers, who didn't understand how to navigate politics, social situations, their insecurities, all of this stuff, that I was able to navigate pretty smoothly. So I brought some stuff to the table that absolutely helped me in achieving what I was able to achieve, and much of that is not even on the written page. It's not even what you're reading in a comic. That's a different matter altogether. The ability to craft a plot and have crisp dialogue and be able to tell an entertaining story. That was, to me, that was almost always secondary to the requirement of playing the chess game smartly, playing the pieces right, knowing how to deal with different people in different ways, because I always had confidence in the telling of the story. I always had confidence in the writing the plot and doing the dialogue. Not every story is going to be great. I understand that, but I was always confident that I could navigate that 22-page issue pretty easily. And the nature of the Marvel universe makes it such that you should never really be able to run out of ideas. It should be almost impossible to run out of ideas while you're working on a monthly Marvel book, especially a team book, which I did so many of. So to me, the more important phase was always navigating the personalities of the people I was working with to get maximum results, not so much my own part of that process,
So, Fabian, talking about this factor of bringing people in, knowing how to work together, I just have to ask you, because you work in many characters that people know, even in Superman and Batman, which apparently weren't the cool comics when you were a kid.
Not when I was a kid. Because they weren't.
That's at least what they told you. But most of your career as a writer, at least in comics, it's X-Men related things, X-Men related projects. I just have to ask you, what does the X-Men, this group of minority to an immigrant, is it because of that, or is there something else that brings you again and again to these characters?
No, the actual truth is not something a lot of X-Men fans want to hear me say, especially if they were 12, 13, 14 years old when I was writing the book. I enjoyed X-Men as a reader, although I went through my phases where I wasn't enjoying the book, so I stopped reading it as a monthly buyer of the comic. From the time Giant Size X-Men #1 came out, I bought that off the rack at a convenience store, but I bought it because I knew the X-Men. Although X-Men had been a failed comic in the 60s, and they were occasional guest stars as I was growing up, they weren't popular by any means. They were losers, actually, considered, by readers. I bought the book because Dave Cockrum was drawing it. And I love Dave Cockrum's art because I'd read his art on Legion of Superheroes, and then I read his art on Avengers books that I bought Avengers every month. That was my book. I loved X-Men. I loved what Chris Claremont did with Cockrum and then with Byrne. There were times I didn't enjoy X-Men as much, so I stopped reading it. By the time I got to work at Marvel in '85, anyone never had a thought of writing X-Men because Chris was always going to write X-Men. So why are you going to waste your time thinking about writing this book? I never planned or plotted or maneuvered to try to write that book because I thought it was first of all, I thought it was Chris's book and would be as long as Chris wanted it to be. That didn't turn out to be the case, but I thought that at the time. Second of all, I thought it was a completely suicidal desire to want to write the X-Men. Because who the hell would want to write X-Men after Chris Claremont writes X-Men for 17 years, right? As it so happens, I was the first person with a writing credit in an issue of Uncanny X-Men that wasn't Chris Claremont in 17 years, I think, or 15 years, because I finished a storyline. I scripted off of his plot on one issue, and then I wrote the next issue entirely myself to wrap up a storyline because there were all kinds of problems going on between Chris and the editor. I didn't even lobby to get the book after Chris was going to leave with issue 3 of X-Men with Jim Lee. I didn't want to script that book. I knew that Jim was going to plot it. I didn't want to script it. So it wasn't an overriding desire on my part to write the book. When I took the assignment after the Image guys left, it was a combination of things. Number one, the company needed to have a strong focus and presence on these books as a result of the turmoil that happened over the course of a year. Rob taking over New Mutants and changing everything and turning it into X-Force, and a longtime readers of New Mutants who might have really liked whatever that book was being upset about it, although the amount of new readers that we were getting far outnumbered those. And then Jim taking over for Chris Claremont, of all people, on X-Men, and then leaving a year later to start Image. The company needed stability. So I knew that we could provide stability between me and Scott and Bob and Peter David and Larry Hama on Wolverine. We knew we could provide stability, and the books needed that. And the second thing was ego. It's simple as that. I felt at that point I'm ready to write Marvel's #1 book because I want the money. That was it. At that point, I had no overwhelming desire to tell the tales of those characters. And in hindsight, it's obvious. I was never as emotionally committed to those books as I was to some of my other work. My work on New Warriors and my work on Nomad was far more personal, far more smartly structured and paced with better dialogue. So it wasn't an overriding desire. The money was too good to say no to. And then the money became too good to walk away from, even though I wasn't happy writing it. So I wrote that book for 4 years. Issue 12 to issue 45. So, that's 3 years. I wrote that book for 3 years, and I probably didn't want to be writing it for almost 2 of those 3 years. So it's not anything I'm all that proud of either, because I stayed on a book that I wasn't happy about being a part of because the money was too good. That's it. And that's not fair. That's not fair to the readers. It's not fair to the characters. I still have plenty of readers who say, I love this, I love these books, these are great, blah, blah, blah. That's good. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong as a reader to have liked something. But I just know where my heart was, and my heart wasn't in those books, those characters, and the way we were telling stories that at that time. My way of writing was diametrically opposed to the way Scott wrote and the way Bob wanted to edit. Bob Harris and Scott Lobdell. So I was the odd man out of the triangle. I was the if it was a tricycle, I was the squeaky wheel, and
Okay.
Bob and Scott were the wheels that functioned smoothly as far as they were concerned, but it wasn't smooth for me in the way I write. The book was a challenge throughout the entire time I was on it.
For the people that aren't so familiar as us to the X-Men comics and everything, Chris Claremont is basically the X-Men writer. So basically, Fabian had to make a sports metaphor, he had to follow Alex Ferguson in United after he retired, or Phil Jackson in the Red Bulls after he retired, and say, okay.
Kind of.
And just like you said, it's really intimidating, right? To say, can I say anything else to these characters that someone else hasn't said before, especially the most famous and most successful writer in that particular book?
Well, that wasn't the problem. No? I was totally comfortable with the ability to continue to tell interesting stories about these characters. What I wasn't comfortable with is the working method under which I had to tell the stories that I was telling. Okay. When I'm writing a monthly book, if I know I'm going to be the monthly book for an extended period of time, I work long form. So I plan 12-issue arcs and subplots that culminate in 12 issues that give you a status quo flip for the next 12 issues. Guess what? That means 24 issues, which means anniversary issue time, because we always knew issue 25, 50, 75, 100 are always going to be anniversary issues. So you're planning it so that you have milestones that you can reach. And those milestones have to be big and propel you into the next flow of stories. And if you look at New Warriors, you read 1 through 25 of New Warriors, it feels like a seamless flow of a story. And that's because it was a seamless flow of a story. I knew what issue 25 was going to be while I was writing issue 4. With X-Men, pretty soon into our run, I have to be honest with you, I didn't know what page 22 was going to be while I was writing page 5, because of the way we worked. And the way we worked is that Scott would have 5,000 ideas a week, and he'd throw them all up against Bob, and they change their minds constantly. And the coordination wasn't cohesive and tight because there were too many books with too many characters. And we made the cardinal mistake in hindsight of having all of those characters living at the mansion, which was a huge mistake, because what ended up happening is that everybody ended up pilfering whatever characters were available. And if you notice, the idea of delineated teams that started with X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, when Chris and Jim started the new X-Men book, there was a blue team and a gold team, and they were two different teams. Watch how quickly into our run there no longer was the case. So, you know, Scott is using characters that were supposed to be my characters, and it's not even that I feel proprietary towards them. It's just, how the hell do you plan a subplot over the course of 4 to 6 months if it's the characters that you're planning the subplot for are being used in other books and doing things that are contradictory to what your story idea was or needs were? So that method of working is something that Bob really enjoyed. He enjoyed the chaos and the uncertainty and the unpredictable nature of a new idea being tossed out constantly. My way of working is boring to Bob. And I understand that. It wasn't even a personal animosity. It's just different mentalities about how to approach the work. My way of working is boring to an editor who likes unexpected chaos, because if I give you a 12-issue outline and I'm sticking to it and just tweaking it a little and evolving it, you're getting bored editing that book because you already know what's going to be happening 10 issues from now, because I told you what was going to be happening 10 issues from now. The reader doesn't know, which is the key here. My job shouldn't really be to entertain an editor. My job should be to entertain a reader. But that's naive, because of course you have to entertain the editor too. And editors are human beings, and they all have different personalities and different personality quirks. And one of Bob's quirks is that he would be a moth to a light, and every time a new light blinked, that interested him, and he'd go flapping his wings off to that other light. And that's just not how I work. That method of working was perfect with Danny Fingeroth, the editor on New Warriors, because he loved stability and he loved knowing what was going to be happening and not getting surprised. Danny hated being surprised. Sometimes it was frustrating because I wanted to surprise him in an issue and he didn't want to be surprised. So it just was a different way to work, and it wasn't conducive to my way of working. It wasn't not having stories to tell. They're good characters. They're interesting characters. They had a foundation before Chris even did all the things he did. Many of those characters, but Chris obviously built it into something tremendously powerful and meaningful to the Marvel universe and to comics. So that foundation, that weight is really strong. It's so strong that it's been able to survive many years of kind of wheel spinning over the last 20 plus years. Everybody coming aboard with a brand new take on X-Men, which to me is stupid, because the take on X-Men should be the foundations of what's been done with it from back in the Roy Thomas, Neil Adams era, which Chris's era didn't deviate too much from that, from a mentality standpoint. A group of young mutants who are going to help other mutants who are oppressed by prejudice, whether that's in the form of super villains or whether that's in the form of government or corporations. That's just the villain of the month. The underlying ethos of the book is, we're here to help you. And the book has strayed too much from that, in my opinion. And even the current stuff I find very, very interesting, but it's a little kooky sometimes, because a little too much of it is strayed from that basic foundation. And I wanted to tell stories that were closer in tone and style to what Chris and John Byrne did. I wanted to tell 2-part, 4-part stories, which were adventures with interesting conflicts and interesting bad guys. And I didn't even give myself a chance to do it, because I didn't do a good enough job in my first few issues, and that kind of turned Bob off a little bit too, made him a little wary. So I didn't give myself the chance to do it right. So I don't begrudge the editor's wariness towards me when I was writing that book, because I don't think he trusted me to tell the stories that I wanted to tell. And that's as much my fault in many ways as it is his, because when I had the initial opportunity to do that, my first year on the book, which was kind of a chaotic, hectic year to begin with, I didn't do a good enough job doing that.
Fabian, I just want to ask you, because you mentioned that you started in Marvel in the 1990s, right?
1985, I started.
1985. I ask you this because I understand that Marvel as a company was almost bankrupt in the beginning of the 90s, and many people that are listening to us that are not such familiar with Marvel will be probably surprised, because right now Marvel is probably one of the, if not the biggest franchise in the movie industry right now. So as someone that worked there, not just as a writer, but later as an editor and things like that, how did it feel at the time, the turmoil, and right now to have lived inside the industry, the increase from a company that almost went bankrupt to one of the biggest movie franchises?
Well, the real answer is that Marvel Comics never went bankrupt and was never in danger of being bankrupt, but it was bankrupted by its owner.
Okay.
And those are two completely different scenarios, okay? A company goes bankrupt because it's not producing product that sells enough to maintain itself as a company, or a company goes bankrupt because it has so much debt leveraged onto it that it cannot support itself as a result of burdens that have been placed on it outside of their control. That's what happened to Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics had the almost perfect storm of the Chinese proverb, do not wish for you may receive. Okay. and Marvel had been looking for an owner that could take it to a higher level in all the years I was there. And in the early 90s, the scumbag billionaire named Ron Perlman bought the company. His company was called McAndrews and Forbes. They owned a lot of different companies. They bought Marvel, and they saw the ability to make much more income than they were making currently as a company. That meant leveraging its assets in a way that was not good for the long term of the industry, but it was good for the short term of their pockets. So we started selling more comics than the company had ever sold before. And we started doing your foil embossed covers and your variant editions and all of that stuff at an up price at $3, $2.50 instead of $1.25. And the numbers were through the roof. And the company was making money hand over fist just from publishing. Then its licensing started to increase too. All of a sudden, we start doing trading card sets that are selling phenomenally well. A toy company signs a master license with us, Toy Biz, and they start selling toys because the X-Men cartoon is on air, and now it's followed by a Spider-Man cartoon. So all of this stuff is happening, and it's making tremendous money. So what does Ron Perlman do with that? He can pocket it himself if he wants, or he can put some of that back into the company to expand it, or he can use it to buy other companies that he thinks will benefit his overall portfolio. And that's what he did. So we had a licensing deal to produce trading cards that was making the company, I think, something like $25 to $40 million a year in revenue. And he ended up buying a trading card company for $200 million. Okay. He had a master licensing toy deal with Toy Biz that was producing our toys, that was making us something like $30 million a year, maybe more. And he decided to buy Toy Biz, okay, for $250 million, right? So you start taking all of those sums and leveraging it against Marvel. And then he takes it public, because by amassing all those other companies, he increases the viability of the value of the company. That's when he went public with the stock. And he ended up making hand over fist money with the stock in the short term. But the company's sales could never handle those leveraged assets. Sebastian, we were making over $300 million a year on publishing in the early 90s. Okay. And that was about 70 million more than we had been making in the mid 80s. All right. So we had grown the sales of the company, $300 million in publishing with another $40 million in licensing. Okay. Is not enough to handle $800 million of leverage debt because of the purchase of Skybox, Fleer, Panini, Italian publishing company, Toy Biz, Heroes World, a distribution company, to say we're going to distribute our own comics and explode the marketplace that was a cash cow for the company. So Marvel didn't go bankrupt. The people making the comics didn't bankrupt the company. The employees of the company didn't do that. That was done to us. And I wasn't even there by the worst of it. I'd already left. I left in 95. I was running a claim in 96. The company didn't go bankrupt, didn't file for bankruptcy until about 97, I think. Okay, 96, 97 is when they filed for bankruptcy. But it was an illusion. That's so that he can keep the money in his pocket and only need to worry about paying out 10 cents on the dollar for that leveraged debt. So Ron Perlman sold the company that he had bankrupted, but he walked away with over $300 million in his own pocket. So how bad could that company have been that he walked away with $300 million in his own pocket and devastated the company and the industry? Devastated it, because that's what those kinds of people do. They don't build anything but their own wallet, right? They only add to their own wallet. They don't add anything of value or substance to a creative industry, right? And so the people who think Marvel was bankrupt, I always just smile, nod my head, and go, think of it this way: Marvel was bankrupted. That's a totally different reality, and it is what happened. So, the Disney purchase and all of that stuff, that all made wonderful sense. In fact, I had a business when Disney first purchased Marvel. What did they purchase it for? 4 billion?
I don't know how much. I can Google it. Let me.
I think it was 4 billion. I think it was 2 to 4 billion. That a business magazine called me up for a quote, and I told them. They said, how bad a mistake is Disney? What?
4 billion. I just Googled
4. Okay, so it was 4. I said, they asked me how bad a mistake has Disney made spending $4 billion on Marvel, and I said it's worth 100 times that in the long run. And the guy said, "You're what?" And I said, "It's worth 100 times that in the long run." He goes, "That's ridiculous." I said, if they do their jobs right, that company's assets are worth 100 times $4 billion. And it will be proven over the course of 25 years that it is, right? So think about how much money they've made off of the movies and off of the television, off of the Disney streaming now, and off of publishing and off of licensing, especially. I know, I mean, maybe saying 100 times is just hyperbole, but it sure as hell, they could have paid $40 billion for that company, and it still would have been a smart business deal, you know?
Yeah, actually, when I got the tip of how much they paid, on the same article, it says Disney bought Marvel for 4 billion in 2009. A decade later, it's made more than 80 billion at the global office alone.
So how close am I? You know?
Yeah. You were really
yeah. And the guy didn't run my quote. He didn't use my quote. He thought I was an idiot. He thought you don't understand this industry. So that's okay, fine. You do, because by that point the Marvel movies had already taken their foothold, and just the success of Iron Man alone made you realize that they knew what they were doing and that they were on the right track. So it is. The shame of all of this is that the characters that are considered business assets, they're intellectual property assets. The characters are worth a tremendous amount of money and generate a tremendous amount of money, but not enough of that money is given back to enhance the publishing end of it. Not enough is used to improve distribution channels, to improve formats, to improve the ability to get more people to read more comic product. And that's a shame. And I know that the people at the companies work very hard to try to fight that, but it's hard to fight that without a lot of cash influx to create systemic changes in the dissemination of the product. And the audience that you're trying to sell it to. They spent so much time. They spent from 1994 until 2016 or 17 chasing direct market 40-year-old man boys, and that was to the detriment of the industry, as we're seeing now with the industry doing more and more diverse things and selling more and more product to a very diverse audience, while the disaffected man boys still stay angry and go to their comic shops once a week and buy comics for their diminishing returns, when the truth of the matter is the company should be spending 80% of their budget and focus on getting 6-year-olds to read comics, and getting 10-year-olds to read comics, and getting women to read comics, and getting international markets to read more comics. That's where the focus and the attention should be going. But too much of it was, you're treading water to try to stay alive. To try to stop yourself from drowning, you're treading water. And that's, in essence, that's what the Marvel and DC's focus on the direct market ended up being for a long time, treading water to stay alive.
Continuing what we were discussing before, and I'm guessing that if they had the movie with the biggest global box office, yeah, and like you said, it was a good sense, a good business sense. They already have the biggest budget, global box office. Sorry.
Yeah, they had the #1 global box office movie.
They made the movie with the biggest global box office, which itself will be enough. And the funny thing is, going back to what we are talking about the Marvel almost being bankrupted, as you said, is that one of the effects was that they sold the rights to their most popular characters at the time, like the Fantastic Four, X-Men, Spider-Man. And I mentioned this because nowadays the biggest names probably including Spider-Man is the Avengers. And as a kid, you were the one that always read Avengers, while others told you, hey, these are the cool ones. But actually the empire of Marvel in Disney and the movies was built more on characters that weren't popular at the time, like Iron Man, Captain America, etc. So to end this thing, I just have to let me just tell the audience how I came to the idea, and to tell you how I came to the idea to invite you to the podcast, because I had the idea that it would be cool to bring someone that invented a popular pop media character. And the thing is that in most cases, characters like Superman, Batman, basically the whole Marvel universe, well, their creators are gone now. And then I just realized, hey, Deadpool is just a relatively recent creation. I can ask Fabian Nicieza to come here. Thank you very much for coming. So
What?
I just have to ask you, is it weird for you? Because as I said, most of the characters that have their movies and their TV series are old characters, and their creators are gone now. And in your case, for you, how does it feel to have a character that you created being a hit in the box office, having someone as famous as Ryan Reynolds interpreting it? Well, I have a couple of questions, but let's start at that.
It feels a lot better than not having co-created a character that has made over $1 billion in movies and hundreds of millions of dollars in merchandising. I think I would be much happier if I'd co-created the character not for Marvel but for Image. But the truth is that you do all of this work, and unlike the 60s when Stan and Jack and Stan and Steve Ditko were creating these characters, they never assumed that the industry would be around 10 years later, right? So they never thought in their wildest dreams that Fantastic Four or Spider-Man might be around 50, 60 years later, generating, the movies and the toys and the cartoons. When I was doing Deadpool, when Rob created Deadpool and I created the character, the template for the character's personality and conflicts and all that, we knew full well that these characters could have longevity. We knew full well that they could be more. Okay, Deadpool was in the Fox deal that encompassed the X-Men characters, so Fox had the rights to develop the character in any way they wanted in film or television. I knew that the minute that things like Blade happened and then the X-Men movies happened, I knew that the opportunity for that character to appear on film was possible and probable by that point. It's not an accident that in issue number 2 of Cable and Deadpool, which is dated 2004, that I had Deadpool say, I look like a Shar-Pei. I look like Ryan Reynolds crossed with a Shar-Pei. I did that before Ryan Reynolds was cast as Deadpool and Wolverine Origins. Because I was in my brain trying to think who would be the right actor to play this part in a few years. And I thought he was the right actor to play the part. Not at that time because he was too young, but in a few years, which he did, 4 years later, right? And you go into it understanding that they could be in a cartoon, that they could be in a movie. So when it happens, it shouldn't be too big of a surprise. The surprise was twofold for me. The surprise was what a good job they did handling the character in the movie, because he's a very difficult character to balance right in a 2-hour movie that will attract, and here's the second surprise, as big an audience as it did of people who had no clue who the hell Deadpool was. Right? They went to see the movie because they heard it was funny. They went to go see the movie because it's Ryan Reynolds, and a lot of women like Ryan Reynolds, a lot of men like Ryan Reynolds too. And they
for whatever reason.
Yeah, for whatever reason, they're interested in seeing that. So the movie had legs. The movie had word of mouth. The movie had an incredibly low budget by the standards of these films. It was rated R. It's about a character that shouldn't reach a mass audience of adults the way this character did, but it's a testament both to the character's strengths. His underlying strengths are really deep, and I don't think most people give it enough credit because they're too busy looking at the stupid jokes or the incessant humor or the grossness of his body, being able to regenerate itself, and writers taking too much liberty with that and always one-upping themselves with that. People dismiss the underlying foundations of the character. And the character is based on 2 ridiculously powerful premises. It is Bugs Bunny meets Frankenstein's monster. Those are 2 templates that have been around for 100 years or longer in Frankenstein's case, obviously, but 100 years they've been around, these templates. And it's the tragic jokester, and people are attracted to the underdog loser who has a sense of humor about their situation, but ultimately it's a very sad situation. So that's the template, the foundation for Deadpool, and that appealed to a tremendous amount of people. The comics notwithstanding. So I was very glad to see that they handled it as well as they handled it. That was, to me, the biggest surprise. Once the reviews came in, once the word of mouth started happening, they asked me, what do you think it's going to do? And I said, I think it's going to do about 350 to 450 million. And they said, you're nuts. It's rated R. Nobody knows who Deadpool is. And I said, I think it's going to do really, really well. And I didn't expect it was going to do 700 million. So I knew it was going to do well the minute I saw what was happening with it. The marketing campaign, the viral marketing they were doing was really smart. I had no involvement in the movie. I didn't even meet all of them until the premiere of the movie in New York. That's when I met everybody. So I had no engagement with it beforehand. The premiere was the first time I saw any of it other than the trailers and stuff. And the minute I saw how they were promoting it, I knew that it was going to do really well. It exceeded even what my expectations for it were. And I had pretty high expectations for it. So I was pretty satisfied when it did what it did. Ultimately, not to sound too crass, but I have no control over the quality of it. I have no control over whether it's good or not. I'm not writing the script. I'm not acting in it. I'm not directing it. So because I have zero control over it, I really am very divorced from all of it. Even though it's Deadpool, so what? I haven't written Deadpool regularly since 2008, so I don't care, I just wrote him a week ago, but that's besides the point. So I really ultimately care in that I get a check every time they make a movie. So I want them to make a movie so that I can get a check. And the check is their way of telling me they love me. That's all. It's not about, I have no control over fans going to see the movie. I have no control over them liking the movie, right? So the check ultimately is the most important part of the whole process. So I want them to make a movie every single week. One
Perfect.
movie a week. I'll get a check every week. That would be good.
I know because you just mentioned it that you hadn't any input in the movies, but there was a cancel Deadpool. I think it was with Donald Glover animated project that ultimately I don't know why it was canceled. Were you asked to have any input in that, or they just don't
Now they
as
don't.
you?
They although it's much of a lesser divide now, there's always been a divide between comic book writers and Hollywood, for lack of a better, umbrella description of it. Screenwriters have never wanted to sacrifice their own jobs for the sake of comic book writers doing the work. Um, Conversely, screenwriters go to comic book editors and go, "I'd like to write a comic," and comic book editors go, "Oh yeah, absolutely." And 9 times out of 10, they stink and they bomb because they don't know how to do the format. But screenwriters will almost never give up their job for bringing someone else in to do their job. Those jobs are too hard to come by, so they fight for them way too much. Um, if
Which
you
makes
own
sense.
the character, if you own the character, like if I were doing an image book, I'd have the ability to negotiate that for myself. Okay, I just had the ability to negotiate that for myself in the book, the manuscript that I was doing, because we've optioned it for television development, and I had the right to be able to say I want to write the pilot. And I didn't want to do that. I said, no, I want to be involved in it. I want an opportunity to write an episode down the road, but I don't want to write the pilot because I feel that that's just giving someone a reason to say no. It could be the best pilot they've ever read, and they could say no because he's never written a pilot before, you know? So I don't want to give them that excuse. And as far as the cartoon is concerned, I have no idea what happened with that. I have no idea what was right or wrong with it. I I can only imagine it must have really been some strange shit going on in order for FX to pull back and to pull out of it. And that may speak, quite frankly, as much to Donald Glover. He just may not have understood who the character was, and he was trying to make it something that it shouldn't have been. And I'm just speculating. I don't know. So he might have been better off having Joe Kelly or me or someone else in the room talking to the writers to make them understand who this character should be, because whatever they submitted clearly was so off base that Marvel pulled the plug on it. They pulled the plug on an FX Deadpool cartoon for adults with Donald Glover involved, and everyone understands what an incredible talent he is, but clearly something was off. Something wasn't connecting. And maybe someone like me or someone like Joe Kelly, like I said, or a writer with experience, having written Jerry Dugan and Brian Posehn, who have a lot of experience in Hollywood as well. Maybe somebody in that room could have been a smarter voice for making that connection work better. But I have zero idea of what happened. I would have liked that too, because I would have gotten a check also. If they made a cartoon, I would have gotten a check. So there you go.
I promise this is the last Deadpool related question, and then I want to ask you about your new book. But before that, I just have to ask. I'm not going to ask you about what you felt when Deadpool appeared in X-Men Wolverine Origins or something like that, because I can imagine. But when you went to the premiere, when you hadn't seen anything before, besides the trailers, and the very first scene was Ryan Reynolds making fun of Deadpool in that movie, and then at the end going back in time and killing the.
That was the second movie. The second movie was when he did all of that. Yeah.
Sorry, I just mixed.
The second movie was when he went back in time. I see when we were at the New York premiere. Rob Liefeld came to the New York premiere, and he had told me that it was really good. He'd already seen the movie a few times. He told me that it was really good, and I was really going to be happy with it. And we know each other well enough to understand what our likes and dislikes are. And from the very opening scene, and I'm sitting next to Ed Skrein, who plays Ajax in the movie, and Rob is 2 seats away from me. And I just see him lean over his seat to look at me, and I look at him and I just smile, and he goes like, yes, yeah, I told you. From the very opening scene, slow motion, everything moving around in the car when he's in the accident and all that stuff, it's just obvious that they understood what they wanted to do with this and how they wanted to do it. And I think honestly, in many ways, the first movie is flawlessly structured and presented piece of work. It's an excellent introduction to a character. It's an excellent pacing, excellent tone and mood, everything. With the budget they had to work with, I think they just did a phenomenal job with it. So I was, it gives you a really good feeling to see that they did it right, because it's almost a redemption or a reclamation of the feeling you had when you watched them do it really wrong, which was Wolverine Origins. So I'm seeing Wolverine Origins at a Marvel screening in New York with people I've known for 20 years, and we're all in this big theater and it's all full, and the movie ends, and I got friends of mine looking for me in the theater, turning around looking for me, and they're only looking for me so that they can go like this. Like they could just shake their head no, like, I'm sorry, man. And I shrugged my shoulders and I left the theater, and I had to walk down to Penn Station in New York. The theater is like 51st Street at Ziegfeld. And Penn Station's 34th Street, 10 blocks away from the theater. I was, okay, I'm done. All right. So much for a Deadpool movie. Ryan Reynolds only did this part because he wanted a small role in the Wolverine Origins because he wanted to spin off a Deadpool movie. That was his plan all along. They had the script written less than a year later after that movie came out. And I thought to myself, oh, well, there goes a chance of ever having a Deadpool movie. But I got to be honest with you, Sebastian, at that point in my career, at the age I was, it's not about seeing my character that I co-created on screen. That's nice, but ultimately it's about the monetary compensation combined with the opportunities that kind of success opens up for you. So 5 years later, or I'm selling my first novel, and I can say the co-creator of Deadpool writing a sarcastic suburban mystery novel, and the editor is going to look at it a little differently because Deadpool was such a success to a mainstream adult male and female audience that it automatically connotes something positive in their mind, instead of saying comic book writer Fabian Nicieza, which might connote something negative in their mind. So the character success, his amiability, his looseness, and how much fun he is, combined clearly with Ryan Reynolds, how charming he is, how witty he is, how much people like him. And we all know we associate our actors with our characters to a ridiculous degree. So there's such a goodwill towards the character, there's such good vibes about the character, that it helps me in the other things I want to do. That's far more important to me than reveling in something I did 25 years ago, or even 15 years ago now. Cable and Deadpool, which I wrote for 50 issues, was from 2004 to 2008. That's a while ago, you know what I mean? So it's rear view mirror for me. I'm always looking at what I'm doing next. I'm looking at what I'm doing now and what I'm doing next, and I've always been that way. I've never really looked back, other than constantly talking about the past in interviews, which I understand, and at conventions with fans and panels and things like that, which I totally understand. That's the only time I'm really thinking about yesterday. and thinking about the past. I'm far busier editing my second book now and starting to think about my third book and the next script I'm going to do for Marvel than I am thinking about what Deadpool means to me, or how I like the movie. You know what I mean? And I think that's positive to be that way, because then I'm always trying to do something next. I'm always trying to do something new. I always take on different kinds of assignments. Animation Bibles, yeah, that sounds interesting. A custom comic for a pharmaceutical company using a Marvel character. Okay, that sounds interesting. It's different. It's unexpected. It's a challenge. And after doing this as long as I've been doing it, writing regular comics isn't that much of a challenge. You want it to be good and you want to get it right, but it's not new. I've written 1,000 comics, 1,500 comics, so it's not new to do it. So I'm always looking for the next interesting, exciting thing to do.
Perfect. And just to keep going with this, the next thing to do, you're starting a new part of your career. You are releasing soon your next and your first novel. Can you tell us first, why did you decide trying a new format, and also what is the story about? Where did you put the idea?
I'm going to try to share a screen, show you the cover.
Perfect.
No, hostess said, can you enable share screening?
Yeah, sure. I'm doing that right now.
Because then I can show you the cover. Can you see it?
Yeah, Suburban Dicks.
Suburban Dicks.
It sounds cool.
That is the cover to the book. I always wanted to write a book. Anytime I tried, I wasn't happy with what I did. It just wasn't right. I didn't have a voice. I literally didn't think I had a voice for writing prose. And anytime I tried, I realized I was trying to mimic whatever voice I thought was good at the time. So in the 90s, it sounded like James Ellroy, and that wasn't good. And in the aughts, it sounded like Lisa Gardner. That wasn't good. At the end of 2017, I just said, I want to try to do something new, and I want to try to do this. I haven't done it before. I'd had a good year financially, work-wise, so I asked my boss, who is my wife, I said, is it okay if I take a chunk of next year to write a book that may not sell? And if it does sell, it's probably going to be to a paperback book company that'll pay me $5,000 or $10,000 for it. And she thought, okay, because the $5,000 and $10,000 isn't going to pay a lot of bills, is it? So I started writing, and I got through 3 chapters, and I showed it to some people, and all of them were positive, and I just kept going. And it wasn't ever my main thing for all of 2018. It was a side thing. There would be sometimes where I went 3-4 days without writing it because I was doing work. And then I'd work on the book for a day or two. So little by little, I just kept going, and I finished it in like January of 2019. And then I had people read it, and I paid an editor to read it. And this is a book idea that I've had since 1993, 1994 is when I had the original idea for the book. The title, the characters, the mystery, the beginning, the middle, the end, all of it I had. And it didn't change very much at all from then, other than age gave me the ability to write more smartly about the subject matter. And it's a mystery. I call it a sarcastic suburban mystery because it's set in the town that I live in West Windsor, Plainsboro, New Jersey. Very suburban town with access to commuting into New York. So there's a lot of commuters who work in New York who live in this area. The town demographics have changed drastically over the course of 30 years. We went from being about 30% of an Asian community, Chinese, Indian, East Asian, to being about 70% Asian community. That changed a lot of the dynamics of how people think. So that's an underlying theme and subtext to the whole murder mystery, because the murder mystery is a gas station attendant gets killed, and this one woman who is pregnant with her fifth child, and she should have been an FBI profiler, but getting pregnant with her first child derailed that, and she never was what she should have been. Starts to investigate this murder, and she runs into the younger brother of her old boyfriend from high school, who is a reporter. And he's a reporter who won a Pulitzer Prize while he was in college. And now he's almost 30 and he works for a weekly newspaper. So he's really, his 20s did not do him much good at all. And the two of them work together to try to solve this mystery. And the mystery becomes a lot deeper than who killed the gas station attendant. The mystery becomes why was the gas station attendant killed, and it's to cover up a crime that happened 50 years earlier. And then you get into the roots of the town, the administration, the government, the police department, and the whole idea of here in the United States is called white flight. Like when communities change cultural tone, white people leave because they don't want to be a part of that cultural change. And the white people who stay have a fear of cultural change. And those are all the underlying themes of the book. And by the time I honed it, I had to cut a lot because I overwrote by a lot, because it's the first time I'd ever done it and I didn't know. I overwrote by a lot, and so I cut like 100 pages out of it. And then I presented it to an agent, and the agent loved it and wanted me to cut more. So I cut another 50 pages out of it. And then he took it out for sale in November of 2019. And we had 5 publishers bid on it. So it turned into an auction for the book. And 5 publishers were bidding on it. By the time it got down to 2 left, each of them increased the offer to make it a 2-book deal instead of just this one manuscript. So I already am now signing a contract for 2 books instead of 1. And it's sold. And Penguin Putnam Publishing are the ones who bought it. Those are the ones we decided to go with. Part of the reason for that is Penguin's such a huge force in publishing, but they bought Putnam Berkeley Publishing several years ago, and I worked for Putnam Berkeley Publishing when I got out of college. So I really liked the idea of my first book being published by the company that I worked for when I first got out of college. I just liked the synchronicity of all of that. And the editors at the editors who were bidding on it all really spoke highly of it. It's going to come out in June of 2021. I'm working on the second book now. I finished the first draft of the manuscript, and now I'm editing my own writing, trying to trim it again. And that book is untitled right now. I think my working title right now is For Better or Purse, because it's a murder mystery involving the murder of a husband, and the main character thinking the wife did it. And it's the same characters, so it's like a series. It's going to be a Suburban Dicks mystery. In the United States, Dicks is an old-fashioned term for private detectives. It's from the 1940s. They were called private dicks. So Suburban Dicks is both commenting on the 2 characters being arrogant assholes, but it's also kind of a play on detectives from way back when. So it'll be a Suburban Dicks mystery, and it'll have, its own title. And hopefully they want to do more. I hope that they want to do a 3rd and a 4th and a 5th. I have enough ideas right now to take me through 6 books. And if I'm doing a book a year and a half, that takes me through my 60s, and that's okay with me, And we signed an agreement for television option development. I can't say with who yet, but before the book was even sold, we already had TV interest, because the manuscript really resonated. it's a 34-year-old Jewish Caucasian lead character and an Asian reporter lead character. It has a lot of diversity because it deals with the Indian community, the Chinese community, the white community in suburban towns. I wasn't surprised that there was some TV interest in it. I really wasn't. I was glad to see how many different production companies wanted to option the book. And the announcement for that will be coming out pretty soon. And it's just an option, so they could sit on it and not turn it into a show. I hope that they do, because it'd be nice, but you never know when you option something. They could sit on it for 18 months and not do anything. They could renew the option for another 18 months. So they could have it for 3 years and not make it. You have no control over, but it was nice to get that sort of additional validation. So the process of selling it alone was ridiculously validating. It felt really good. It's been 30 years since I've had that level of oomph, since the early 90s when I was selling all the comics I was selling. That's been that long since I've had that level of attention and interest. So it felt really good that this thing I wanted to do for myself ended up being something that I might be able to keep doing for a while. I've read the book too many times at this point for me to have a fair opinion of it. I'm sick and tired of reading the book, but I'm not the kind of writer that goes over their own work that much. So to have to go over your own book and cut and edit and reread and cut and edit and reread. I mean, my original manuscript was 540 pages, and the final manuscript was 380 something. So I cut a lot, and then stuff I had to cut because I didn't have enough experience as a writer, repeating a lot of things, something that the audience already knows, but the character doesn't know, and then I'm repeating it for the sake of the character, not for the sake of the audience. The audience doesn't want to read that. So I had I was doing that a lot because the two of them are on separate tracks. The two main characters are slightly on separate tracks, so they have to come together and share information and then go off and use that information. So it ended up being a lot of stuff I could cut because it was too repetitive. And it's a learning experience because now with the second manuscript, I'm much closer to where I needed to be. I came in at like 390, 400 pages, and I got to cut a little off of that, but nowhere near as much as I had to the first time. So I felt like maybe by the fourth book, I'll get it to the word. I'll get it just right to the word. But it's been a really good learning experience. It's been a lot of fun to be validated that way with the interest that it received. It was really rewarding, and if I could turn it into the next 10 years of my life, yeah, that's a pretty good way to close the book. That's a pretty good last chapter to my career.
Do you think that changing formats, you're using parts of your writing brain that you didn't have before because no one is illustrating your ideas, and at the same time it's refreshing for you and injecting you with energy and passion for writing?
Yes, 100%. Very well said. What I brought from the comic work to it, which I could tell right off the bat, was a sense of pacing, because you're always limited in the amount of pages you have in a comic. So you always have to be very tight with your plotting and your pacing and quick with it. I was able to bring that to the book, which was a benefit. It's a positive. People don't want to read meandering novels now. They don't want to read novels that are, for the most part, they don't want to read novels that are 1,000 pages long. This kind of book, it's a murder mystery. It's an entertaining murder mystery. It's got a lot of humor in it. You want that to be fast paced. You want that to be a quick read. Honestly, this isn't Dostoevsky. This isn't, this isn't Herman Melville. This isn't intended to be literature that's taught at a college class. It's meant to be an entertaining read, predominantly for a female audience, because they're mostly the ones who read murder mystery books. So I had that in mind all along, and the lessons I learned in comics for pacing and for dialogue really helped me. But not having an artist to lean on made me learn and figure out how to be very economical with my descriptions of things. The other thing I learned is that readers aren't that interested in the fine detailing of location, of clothing, of kitchen items. They don't want to read 2 pages of you describing a bedroom. You want to just establish that it's a bedroom and maybe 1 or 2 things about it that are unique to the character, so that you understand the character better as a result of how you're describing the bedroom. So I purposely avoided in-depth descriptions of the comforter on the bed, and the colors on the wall, because I was told and I understood that it was a nice combination of my gut feeling going, I don't think people want to read that anymore, combined with advice I was getting back telling you don't need to go that way. You don't, just because it's not a comic book, just because it's not visual, you don't have to describe everything. That helped me too. I think that a lot of the lessons I learned in comics have really stood me well in all the writing I've done in my career, whether it's been animation or video game script rewriting, the intellectual property work that I've done. The comic book writing has been almost like a DNA foundational genetic thing, which makes you understand how to say as much as you need to say as quickly as possible. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually a really good thing, because what it does is it almost always makes you get to the heart of the scene, the heart of the story, the heart of the character. You get to it more quickly. And in comics, you don't have that much of a choice, because you don't have that much space per issue or that many panels per page. So you have to understand how to hone it. And I think all the cutting I had to do, notwithstanding, the story's plot was very well honed. The characters are very well honed. They're very they're relatable in their insecurities and their arrogances and their confidences, but they each have individual voices and each have individual styles to them. And the editors who read the book really resonated with the characters. The TV producers who read the book, the manuscript, really resonated to the characters, especially on television. This is a character we want to see on screen. This pregnant woman who's Sherlock Holmes, yeah, we want to see her on screen. And that was really rewarding. And I never would have been as able to sell you that pregnant woman who is Sherlock Holmes if I hadn't been a comic book writer for as long as I've been, because I understood how to present her visually, and because I imagined myself describing her to an artist, and I was able to present her verbally, because I understand how to find the keys to a character's voice through their dialogue, because you have to when you're writing comics.
Okay, Fabian, to start wrapping this up, every single speaker that we have in the program, we ask them their 3 do's and 3 don'ts for entrepreneurs. So 3 things that they should do and 3 things they shouldn't do. What are yours?
3 do's. Do the work, do it on time, and do it again. And
Works.
3 don'ts. Don't complain unless you have the job already. Don't be difficult to work with, even though you can be difficult about the work. All right? There's a fine line between the two, and you have to understand how to navigate it. The 3rd don't is don't write NFL Super Pro. That would definitely be one of that would want to be one of my definite don't write NFL Super Pro, because you're doing a favor to your friends and coworkers, and it ends up being an anchor around your neck for the next 25 years. So don't do it.
Okay. Basically, don't do favors you'll regret later.
Don't do favors you'll regret. Yes.
Perfect. So, Fabian, if anyone wants to get acquainted with your work and learn a little bit more, about your different books, comics, etc., how can they find you on social media?
Easiest way to get me is usually on Twitter. It's at Fabian Nicieza, both names all together. And you can follow me on Twitter and ask me any questions anytime. I answer DMs all the time, and I answer questions all the time. I promote my work. Twitter is mostly a platform for me to complain about politics and to promote my work. So I'm always promoting what I'm doing and telling people what's up, what conventions I'll be going to, when we go to conventions again, hopefully soon, and what new books I have coming out all the time.
Perfect. Well, Fabian, I want to thank you a lot for your time.
Thank you very much, Sebastian.
Hope you had a great time like us. And as we say on this show, keep it up.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it very much.
Si te gustó el episodio de hoy, recuerda que puedes escucharnos en Spotify y YouTube, y para más herramientas de estos temas, estamos en Instagram y Facebook como @Entreprenup. Si quieres seguir a nuestro invitado de hoy, te dejamos en la caja de descripción sus redes sociales y datos de contacto. Gracias por escucharnos y nos vemos en el próximo episodio. Recuerda, keep it up.